The smell of the funeral home is what I remember first. Lilies and floor wax and something underneath both of them, something cold. I sat in the third row because that was where they put me. Third row, behind his sister, behind his sister's children, behind a cousin I had met exactly twice in 41 years of marriage. My name is Adelaide Whitfield. I am 71 years old, and 3 weeks ago I buried the only man I ever loved, sitting behind people who did not love him half as much as I did. I want to tell you how I got there. I want to tell you because I think there are women listening right now who feel the way I felt that morning, who have been pushed to the edge of their own lives by people who share their last name, and I want them to know what I did next. I want them to know it is allowed. My husband's name was Theodore. Theo to everyone except his mother, who called him Teddy until the day she died, and me, who called him my whole life and meant it. We met in 1981 at a hardware store in Asheville, North Carolina. I was buying a hinge for a screen door I was trying to fix in the rental house I shared with 2 other nursing students. He was standing in the aisle holding 2 different boxes of nails, looking lost. He asked me which one I would buy, and I told him neither because what he needed was a wood screw, and he laughed like I had told him the funniest thing in the world. 6 months later, we were married at the courthouse, with my sister and his coworker as witnesses, and the only thing I wore that was new was a pair of white shoes from JCPenney that gave me blisters before the day was out. Theo had been married before. I knew that going in. He had 2 children from that first marriage, a son named Bradley and a daughter named Sloan. Bradley was 11 when we married. Sloan was 9. Their mother had walked out 2 years before I met Theo. Walked out with a man who sold insurance in Charlotte, and the children had been with Theo full-time ever since. I want to be very clear about this part because it matters. I did not steal their father. I did not break up that home. I came into a house where 2 children were already grieving a mother who had chosen to leave, and I tried to love them as much as I knew how. I worked nights at Mission Hospital for 36 years. I made breakfast before I slept and dinner after I woke up. I drove Sloan to her ballet recitals and sewed the costumes when the seamstress charged too much. I sat through every one of Bradley's basketball games, even when my feet were swollen and my back was on fire from a 12-hour shift. I paid for Bradley's braces when his mother said she could not. I paid for Sloan's prom dress, the one she pointed at in the magazine, the navy blue one with the beadwork on the bodice. I helped both of them with college applications, with FAFSA forms, with the long quiet drive to drop them off at their dorms. And I want you to understand something else. I never asked them to call me Mom. I never insisted on it. I told them when they were small that they could call me Adelaide or Addie or anything else they wanted, and that they did not have to love me. But I would love them whether they decided to or not. Bradley called me Addie until he was about 15, and then he started calling me by my first name. Full and formal, like I was a teacher he was not particularly fond of. Sloan called me Adelaide her whole life, even in birthday cards. Theo knew. He never made a fuss about it because that was not the kind of man he was, but he knew. I would catch him watching me sometimes when I was packing one of their lunches or folding their laundry, and his face would have this look on it that I cannot describe except to say it was a look of apology. He never said, "I am sorry they are like this." He did not have to. We understood each other. We had no children together. We tried. For about 4 years we tried, and then we stopped trying and we did not talk about it again. Theo said one night, lying in our bed with the window open and the cicadas going, he said, "Addie, we have the 2 we have, and we are going to be good to them." And I said, "Yes, we are." And that was the end of that conversation, and it was the end of a grief I never quite finished, but I made my peace with it because I had him, and that was enough. Theo was a contractor. He built houses, mostly, and additions, and he had a small crew of 4 men who worked with him for 25 years. He was good. He was the kind of good where people called him 5 years after he had finished their kitchen just to tell him it still made them happy. We were not rich. We were not poor either. We bought a piece of land on the side of a mountain in 1989, 3.5 acres with a view of the ridge, and Theo built our house himself on weekends and evenings for the better part of 3 years. Every nail in that house he drove. Every window frame he sanded. The kitchen cabinets are walnut because he found a man selling walnut planks at an estate sale and he could not stop himself. That house. I need you to understand about that house because the house is most of this story. Theo put my name on the deed the day we moved in. He said, "This is your house too, Addie, and I want everyone to know it. The deed is in both our names with right of survivorship, which means when one of us dies, the other one owns it outright, free and clear." He did the paperwork himself. He went down to the courthouse and stood in line and filed it. Sloan was 17 when we moved in. Bradley was 19 and already at NC State. Sloan came up one weekend to see the new house, and she walked around the rooms with her arms crossed, and she said, "This is bigger than I thought it would be." Like that was a criticism. Like the house had personally offended her. I made lasagna that night, and she pushed it around her plate and went to bed early. I should have known then. I should have known a lot of things. Theo got sick in the fall of 2024. A pain in his side that he ignored for too long, the way men do. By the time he saw a doctor, it was already in his liver and his lymph nodes, and the oncologist used that voice doctors use when they are telling you something they already know the ending of. Pancreatic, stage 4, months, not years. I quit my last per diem shifts the next day. I had retired from full-time work 3 years before, but I had been picking up shifts to keep myself busy, and I called the scheduling office and I told them I was done. I came home and I sat on the porch with Theo and I told him I was going to take care of him myself in our house for as long as we had. He cried. He had not cried in front of me more than 4 times in our entire marriage, and he cried then, and he put his hand on my knee and he said, "Thank you, Addie. Thank you for being the love of my life." I called Bradley that night. I called Sloan the next morning. I told them both what the doctors had said. Bradley flew in from Atlanta 3 days later, stayed for the weekend, and went home. He came back twice more in the next 4 months. Twice. His father was dying. His father, who had paid for his college and his first car and his wedding to a woman who would not look me in the eye, was dying, and Bradley came back twice. Sloan lives in Raleigh, 3.5 hours away. 3.5 hours away. She came up 4 times in the same 4 months. Twice she stayed less than 2 hours. Once she brought her husband Patrick, a man who works in commercial real estate and who has been measuring our house with his eyes since the day Sloan introduced us. Once she brought her daughter, my granddaughter Eleonora, who was 8, and who was the only person in that family I would still walk through fire for. I bathed Theo. I changed his sheets when his body could not hold itself together anymore. I crushed his pills into applesauce when he could not swallow them whole. I read to him from the books he loved, John D. MacDonald and a worn copy of A River Runs Through It, and I held his hand through every long night when the morphine was not enough and his eyes were wild with the kind of fear you cannot name out loud. He died on a Tuesday morning in February. The hospice nurse, a woman named Doreen, who became one of the best friends I have ever had over those final weeks, was with me when it happened. He had been unresponsive for about a day. His breathing changed the way they tell you it will change, and Doreen squeezed my shoulder and she said, "Adelaide, honey, it is time." And I held his hand and I told him I loved him and I told him I would be all right, and I told him to go on ahead, and he did. He went on ahead. I called Sloan first. She did not pick up. I left a message. I called Bradley. He picked up on the second ring and he said, "Oh." And then he said, "Okay." And then he said, "Okay." And then he said, "I will fly out tomorrow. Not today. Tomorrow." The funeral was 4 days later. I want to tell you how the funeral happened because I still cannot believe it happened the way it did, even now, sitting here, 3 weeks later. Sloan called me the day after Theo died. She said, "Adelaide, Patrick and I have been talking, and we think it would be easier on you if we handled the arrangements. You have been through so much. Let us do this for you." I want you to hear how that sounded to me at the time. It sounded like kindness. It sounded like one of the first kind things she had said to me in 20 years. I was so tired. I had not slept more than 3 hours at a stretch in 2 months. I said yes. I said thank you. I said I would help with whatever they needed. She did not need anything. That is what she told me. She said, "We have it covered, Adelaide. Just rest." I should have known. I should have known when she did not ask me what kind of flowers Theo liked. I should have known when she did not ask me where he wanted to be buried, even though we had bought plots together at the cemetery on Buncombe County Road in 2010. I should have known when nobody called me to confirm the time or the place or who was speaking. The morning of the funeral, I drove myself. My sister had offered to come up from Charleston, but I had told her no. I would be fine. Sloan and Bradley would be there. It would be family. I wore the black dress Theo had picked out for me at a department store in 2018 because he said it made me look like a movie star. I wore the pearl earrings he gave me for our 30th anniversary. I drove the 40 minutes to the funeral home and I parked and I walked in and the woman at the door looked at her clipboard and she looked at me and she said, "I am sorry, ma'am. What was the name again?" I said Adelaide Whitfield. She looked at her clipboard. She looked at me again. She said, "I do not have you on the family list. I thought it was a mistake." I told her, "I am the widow. I am Theodore Whitfield's wife. I have been his wife for 41 years. There must be a mistake." She got a manager. The manager went to find Sloan. Sloan came out into the foyer wearing a black suit that fit her too well, and her hair was done in a way it had not been done since her own wedding, and she looked at me and she said, "Adelaide, can we talk for a minute?" She took me into a little room off the foyer. It had a couch and a box of tissues and a framed print of a beach. She closed the door. She said, "Adelaide, Patrick and I think it would be better if you sat in the back, with the friends, not with the family." I could not understand the words. They were English words, and they made no grammatical sense. She said, "You have to understand, Adelaide, this is hard on us. This is our father, and you were his wife, but you were not his real family, and there are people here from his first marriage who flew in and his mother's side, and it would just be easier if you were not, up front. People might get the wrong idea." I said, "What idea is that, Sloan?" She said, "Adelaide, please do not make this difficult. It is one day. Just sit in the back. Or honestly, if you want to leave, we would understand. Nobody would think less of you." I sat in the third row. I do not know why I sat in the third row. I do not know why I sat in the third row instead of leaving. I think I sat there because Theo was in the front of that room in a casket I had not picked out, surrounded by flowers I had not chosen, and I could not bear to leave him alone with them. I sat in the third row and I listened to Bradley give a eulogy that mentioned me exactly once, in passing, as my father's second wife. I listened to Sloan talk about how her father had raised her single-handedly after her mother left, which was a lie, but a lie nobody in that room was going to correct. I listened to a pastor I had never met talk about a man he had never met, and I held my own hands in my lap and I did not cry, because I had cried for 2 months already and I had nothing left. After the burial, Sloan and Patrick had a reception at a restaurant downtown. I was not invited. I drove home. I let myself into the house Theo built, and I sat on the porch and I watched the light go down over the ridge, and I thought about what I was going to do. The next morning, the phone rang at 7:30. It was Sloan. She did not say good morning. She did not ask how I was. She said, "Adelaide, Patrick and I are coming up this afternoon. We need to talk about the house." I said, "What about the house?" She said, "Well, Daddy left everything to us. You know that, right? The house is ours now. We have been more than fair. We have let you stay there while everything was happening, but we have a buyer interested in the property, and Patrick has been talking to a developer about subdividing the land, and we are going to need you to start packing. We can give you until the end of the month if you need it, but the realtor wants to start showing the house next week. I want you to understand that I stood there in my kitchen, in the kitchen Theo built with walnut cabinets, holding the phone, and I did not say a single word for almost a full minute. Sloan kept talking. She was already on to the next thing. She was saying something about a storage unit they had found that was reasonably priced. She was saying she could come help me pack if I needed. I finally said, Sloan, honey, the house is in my name. She laughed. She actually laughed. She said, Adelaide, I do not think you understand how these things work. The house was Daddy's. It passes to his children. That is just how it works. We are trying to be nice about this, but legally, the house is ours. I said, Sloan, your father put my name on the deed in 1992. We own the house jointly with right of survivorship. When he died, the house became mine alone. I am the sole owner of this property. I have been for 3 weeks. There was a silence on the other end of the line that I will remember until the day I die. It was the silence of a person whose entire plan has just walked into a wall. She said, that cannot be right. I said, it is right. She said, Patrick said. I said, Patrick said. I said, Patrick was wrong. She said, Adelaide, you cannot just take our family home from us. That house has been in our family. I said, that house was built by your father with his own hands on land he bought with me 3 years after he and I were married. That house has never been in your family. That house has been my home for 35 years. I am sorry that the conversation you thought you were going to have this morning is not the conversation we are having, but the house is mine. She started crying. She started saying she could not believe I was doing this to her. She said her father would be ashamed of me. She said her father wanted his children to have his legacy. She said a lot of things. I waited until she was done. And then I said 4 words. I said, do not call again. And I hung up the phone. I sat down at the kitchen table after that, and I shook for about 20 minutes. I have not cried much since Theo died, but I cried then. I cried because I had loved that girl since she was 9 years old. I cried because she had sat in my kitchen and eaten food. I had cooked her and worn dresses. I had bought her and read books. I had checked out of the library for her, and she had been planning all that time for the day she could push me out of my own life. I cried because somewhere inside me I had still believed, despite everything, that she would surprise me. That at the end she would come over and sit on the porch with me and cry about her dad and let me cry about her dad and let me cry about my husband. That we would find each other in the loss. She did not. She was not going to. I called a lawyer that afternoon. Not the family lawyer Theo and I had used, because I was not sure what Sloan and Patrick might have already done, who they might have called, what they might have been told. I called a woman my friend Doreen recommended, an estate attorney in Asheville named Carmen, and I drove down to her office the next day with every document I owned. The deed, the marriage certificate, the death certificate, Theo's will, which left everything to me, simply and clearly the way he had written it in 2019 when we had updated our paperwork together. Carmen looked through everything, and she leaned back in her chair, and she said, Adelaide, you are in very good shape. There is nothing they can do. She helped me set up a revocable living trust. The house went into the trust. My bank accounts went into the trust. Theo's small life insurance policy, which was already mine, went into the trust. I named Eleonora, my granddaughter, as the primary beneficiary, with a clause that nothing transfers to her until she is 25, and that her parents have no access to any of it under any circumstances. I named Doreen as the trustee. Carmen drew up a healthcare directive and a power of attorney, and we got everything notarized and filed before the week was out. I changed the locks on the house. I had a security system installed. I put up a no trespassing sign at the bottom of the driveway, which I had never done in 35 years, because we had always been the kind of people who left the door unlocked and welcomed visitors with iced tea. Those days were over. Sloan and Patrick showed up at my driveway 9 days after the funeral. I had been expecting them. I watched their car pull up to the gate I had installed, the one with the new code, and I watched Patrick get out and rattle the gate, and I watched Sloan talk on her phone with her hand on her hip. I went down the driveway to meet them. I did not open the gate. Sloan said, Adelaide, we need to talk. I said, we already talked, Sloan. You said what you said. I said what I said. Patrick said, Mrs. Whitfield, with respect, my wife is grieving. She did not mean it the way it came out. We just want to discuss the property and figure out a fair solution. I looked at Patrick. I looked at this man who had been measuring my house with his eyes for 15 years. I said, Patrick, there is nothing to discuss. The property is mine. It was mine the day Theo died, and it will be mine the day I die. After that, it will not go to you, and it will not go to Sloan, and you can spend the next 30 years suing me if you want. But you will not get a square inch of this land. Sloan said, you cannot do this. He was our father. I said, he was my husband for 41 years. He was your father for 43. And in those 43 years, you visited him twice in the last 4 months of his life. You did not bathe him. You did not feed him. You did not change the sheets when he soiled them, and you did not hold his hand when he was scared. I did, every day, and the only thing he asked me before he died, the only thing, was that I take care of myself. He knew you. He knew exactly who you were. And he made sure, years ago, that this place was mine, because he knew if it was in his name alone, you would come for it. Sloan was crying again. She said, you are punishing me because I asked you to sit in the back at the funeral. I made one mistake. I said, Sloan, you did not make a mistake. I said, Sloan, you did not make a mistake. You made a decision. You decided who I was to your father and to you, and you decided in front of 200 people. I am simply agreeing with you. Patrick tried one more time. He said, Mrs. Whitfield, the developer, is offering well above market value. If we sold the land, we could all walk away comfortable. There is enough here for everyone. I said, Patrick, this is not land. This is my home. My husband built it. I am not selling it. Not to you, not to a developer, not to anyone. I am going to live in this house until I die, and then it is going to my granddaughter, when she is old enough to know what to do with it, and there is not a thing on God's green earth either of you can do about it. I turned around and I walked back up the driveway. They yelled some things at my back. I did not turn around. I have not spoken to Sloan since. Bradley called me about 2 weeks later. He had heard, of course, the family grapevine being what it is. He was calmer than his sister. He said, Adelaide, I just want to understand what is happening. I said, your sister tried to take my home. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I am sorry. He said I should have been there more. With Dad. I am sorry. And I said, yes, Bradley, you should have been. And I told him I did not want to talk to him for a while and that I might be ready in 6 months or a year. But right now I needed quiet, and he said he understood. And he has not called again, and I think that is the right thing, for now. Eleonora's mother has tried to keep me from seeing her. Of course she has, but Eleonora is 8 years old and very smart, and she has my phone number memorized, and she calls me from her father's phone when she is at his house every other weekend. She called me last Sunday and she said, Grandma Addie, are you okay? And I said, yes, baby, I am okay. And she said, Mommy says you stole Grandpa's house. And I said, sweetheart, Mommy is wrong about that. The house is mine because Grandpa wanted it to be mine, and someday when you are grown it will be yours, because I want it to be yours. And she said, okay. And then she asked if she could come visit me in the summer, and I told her we would figure it out somehow. We will. I am sitting on the porch right now telling you this. The sun is coming down over the ridge the way it does every evening, and the cicadas have started up, and the dogwood that Theo planted the year we moved in is dropping its last white petals onto the grass. This is my house. He built it for me. He put my name on the deed because he loved me and because he knew, in some deep place inside himself, who his daughter was going to grow up to be. If you are a woman my age, listening to this, and you have a husband and a house and stepchildren you have loved as best you could, I am going to tell you what I should have known 30 years ago and what nobody told me. Put your name on every piece of paper. Make sure the deed is in both your names, with right of survivorship. Make sure the will is current and clear. Talk to an estate attorney, not a family friend, not someone your husband knew from church, an actual estate attorney who works for you. Set up a trust if you can. Know where every account is and what is in it. Do not assume that the love you have given will be returned. Do not assume that the years you put in will be honored. Hope for it. But prepare for the other thing too, because the other thing happens. It happened to me. I am going to be all right. I have Doreen, who comes over on Thursdays. I have a sister who calls every other day. I have a granddaughter who whispers I love you into the phone like a secret. I have this porch and this view and the cabinets Theo made out of walnut planks from an estate sale in 1991. I have my own name on every piece of paper that matters. I have my life. What I learned is this: family is not the people who share your last name. Family is not the people who show up to bury you when there is something to be gained from the showing up. Family is the person who sits with you on the porch when the light is going. Family is the person who held your hand when you were dying. Family is the person who, after 41 years, looked at you across a kitchen table and said, "This is your house too, and I want everyone to know it." He knew. He always knew. And he made sure. I am still here. I am not going anywhere, and the house is mine. I've been sitting on this porch a lot lately, watching the light change on the ridge, and I keep coming back to one thing. Nothing that happened to me was an accident. Sloane did not wake up the morning of her father's funeral and decide to push me into the third row. That decision had been forming inside her for 35 years, in small choices and small silences, in every time she called me Adelaide instead of anything warmer, in every birthday card she signed without a heart next to her name. And I did not wake up the morning after and suddenly become a woman who could say 4 words and hang up the phone. That woman had been forming inside me too, all those years, in every double shift I worked, in every lasagna I made for a child who pushed it around her plate, in every quiet conversation Theodore and I had about what we would do if things ever came to this. We were both the result of who we had been, slowly, for a very long time. That is the part I want you to take with you if you take anything. The character you build in the small hours is the character that shows up in the loud ones. Sloane built greed quietly, and it walked into that funeral home wearing a tailored suit. Theodore built love quietly, and it walked into a courthouse in 1992 and put my name on a deed. I built endurance quietly through 40 years of bedpans and night shifts, and forgiveness. And when the moment came that I needed to stand at the bottom of my own driveway and tell my stepdaughter no, I had the spine to do it, because I had been growing that spine for decades without knowing it. If you are listening and you are tired, the way I was tired, I want you to know that being kind is not the same as being soft. I was kind to Sloane for 35 years. I am still kind to Eleonora. Kindness was never the problem. The problem was that I confused kindness with silence, and I confused love with letting people decide who I was. Those are different things. You can love a person and still refuse to disappear for them. Learn the paperwork. Learn the law in your state. Sit down with a real estate attorney and ask the hard questions even if you have to write the check yourself. Wisdom is not waiting until you need it. Wisdom is preparing in the quiet years so the loud years cannot take everything from you. Theodore knew that. He gave me the gift of preparation, and I gave myself the gift of using it. I am 71. I have a house my husband built me, a granddaughter who calls me on Sundays, and a name on every piece of paper that matters. That is a life. I earned it the slow way. So can you?